Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Excited to have you guys here for part two. In our first session, we really dug into the perception that audits have within the industry and the tension that often comes along with them and how we can overcome that. In today's session, we're really going to be covering the overall technology with ServiceNow and Clear Sky IGA as we take you through the journey of an audit and continuous improvement.
So, hi, I'm Phil Swann. I'm a managing consultant at Wrangu. Wrangu are an elite ServiceNow partner focused on integrated risk, security, and privacy solutions built on the ServiceNow platform. You can find Wrangu on LinkedIn if you hashtag Wrangu. TJ?
Absolutely. And my name is TJ Gryziec. I'm the Chief Product Officer and one of the founders here at Clear Sky. We're a technology partner of ServiceNow focused on identity management on the ServiceNow platform. So everything from onboarding, offboarding transfers, access requests, and access reviews, which we'll be showing you guys a little bit of today. So nice to meet everyone. Thank you. All right, so like I mentioned in part one, we really covered the sort of the feelings around an audit. The nerves and what to worry about and what not to, and really that we should embrace the audit. We should look at the auditor as an MVP, someone who really is making us better over time, and we're going to see some of that in the technology today. So we're going to dig in. We're going to get into a live demo. We're excited to show you the power between ServiceNow's GRC and Clear Sky IGA working together.
Excellent, thanks TJ. And for anyone watching live, we've got the Q&A as well. So if any questions come up as we're going along, we might pick them up, or we'll try and reserve a little bit of time at the end to come back to those. So I think this next slide talks about the thing we're going to be covering off, but we're going to zoom into this, I think, a bit more. So this is showing Clear Sky and ServiceNow GRC. And we've got a better version. I think this is a little bit small for the audience, so we'll get into this on the next slide. So,
perfect. So let's go ahead and jump right in. We're going to start with that diagram that Phil had brought up. It's going to go over just the interconnections. We want to give you a high-level overview of some of the details of what we'll talk about, because when we go to screen, it may be hard to track what's happening, over the top of all these processes. So let me go ahead and share my screen real quick, and everyone on the webinar should now see my Miro diagram. So here we're going to go ahead and talk about the interplay between ServiceNow's GRC and the Clear Sky IGA application. I'll start by giving you a general overview of the Clear Sky IGA application. So we're a fully featured identity governance and administration application on the ServiceNow platform. What that means is we connect to all of your downstream and upstream systems, aggregate the access data into something that we call an identity warehouse. That means we'll be connecting to your cloud and on-prem solutions, as you can see within the diagram here. Once we ingest that data, we aggregate it against the individual identities within the system, and then we can understand who has access to what. Once we understand who has access to what, we can overlay processes on top of that data. So as you can see in the blue boxes a little bit further down below, we can start to do things like access reviews, send out periodic reviews to your end users, ensure that people have the access that they need, and they don't have additional access or haven't accumulated access over time. And if we need to remediate or revoke access, we can definitely do that. Now, once we get a handle on the existing access, ensuring that we're setting people up for success in the future, and you can see that we also do access requests and identity lifecycle. So from the time someone starts at the organization to the time that they leave, and everything in between is being tracked and monitored within the ServiceNow system. We onboard, we track people when they change, we offboard individuals. And if at any time during their employment that they need additional access, they can always go to the ServiceNow portal, ensuring that compliance is being enforced, approvals are occurring, and access is being granted automatically within the system. So as you can imagine, through all of these activities that are happening within the IGA solution, there's plenty of opportunity for compliance checks to validate that we're following the different controls that need to be followed. So I'm going to hand it over to Phil so he can go over sort of the GRC side of things and talk about the elements that are going to make up the demo today.
Just before we do that, TJ, I don't know if you want to just zoom in a little bit. I'm not sure how much detail the audience is getting on some of this stuff around the identity warehouse within the Clear Sky product. So it might just be because of my screen. Yeah, we're getting a bit more detail in here. So, I mean, this is a really interesting concept. The concept of an identity warehouse built in the ServiceNow platform, because of what you've got, you know, in the platform, sys user table, you've got the users, groups, roles, and so on. But for you in this system, identity is something different, something more specific.
It absolutely is. So what we found early on is that although the sys user table monitors sort of the user repository for access to ServiceNow, it doesn't always contain every single person or every single identity within the organization. You may have partners or vendors or customers that are never going to log into ServiceNow because it's your system of record internally. And so we wanted to make sure that we could track all of those other identities within the system without overloading the sys user table today. I would say the other major difference in our identity warehouse is how we track relationships over time. So many people have attributes of their identity, their location, their department, the things that tell the system what type of work you do within the organization, what are your responsibilities. And so in the sys user table, those attributes come and go. When you change your title is now the new one. And unless you dig into the audit, you really can't gain access to your previous personas from a reporting capability perspective. So we also maintain the history of those relationships so that if you start off as a contractor and you get hired on as an employee, or you have multiple relationships with that entity, that we can track those independently within the system also, understanding where you got that account, why you got that account, and under what context you got that account. And all of this ties back into all of the other processes we discussed a bit earlier.
And so the environment that you see at the top there, that's connecting out. So that's going out of ServiceNow, right? I don't know. You've got a little dialogue at the bottom. Maybe just click hide on that and just move us up a little bit. So
yeah, absolutely. So that's a good point. So when we connect to a downstream or upstream system, whether that's your HR system like Workday or your directory like Active Directory or AWS, a cloud offering, we're connecting to those and aggregating the identity data, the security model from those systems. So each of those systems that we're connecting to, or applications or directories that we're connecting to, act as an environment within our system. So when we connect to AWS, we pull in the entitlements, the policies, the groups from AWS, the users and the memberships. And, like you mentioned earlier, the sys user table is actually a source of, identity information also. So if we were going to manage the ServiceNow instance, we would also connect to the sys user table in that case, or the sys user group and the role table also, to be able to aggregate that information under a single ServiceNow environment. And you may have multiple environments like we all do. So you have a dev, test, prod, and we can manage those independently also. So connecting to those, aggregating them, and treating them as a single connection and environment. Or they could be disconnected systems. So if you have to import a flat file and you don't have a bidirectional integration to that system, we can also ingest CSVs or XLSX, different type of file formats that we can then transform into the data model also, which is going to enable you to perform all the activities that we'll talk about today.
And just at the bottom of this diagram as well, you've got what I would probably put under the banner of the operational processes for your Clear Skye product, right? So you've got your access reviews, access requests, and the whole life cycle around those identities. But these are like somewhat of a task record.
They are, yeah. And these are the high level categories. So you can have different types of access reviews. You could be reviewing accounts, or you could be reviewing individual entitlements or roles that an individual has. From an access request perspective, you could be requesting access to a server or an application or a physical location. All types of access can be requested. You may need a new account, or in fact, you could request an entitlement itself if you need a security group or distribution list provisioned within the system. And the same goes for that identity lifecycle tile, where we're talking about, onboarding individuals or transfers or offboarding. And in some cases, we even have customers doing things like leave of absence or legal hold. And the workflow capabilities within ServiceNow really make the possibilities endless and the type of activities that we can manage under these buckets.
Excellent. So maybe zoom back out again. I'll have a go at trying to just explain what's going on with the GRC side over on the left-hand side. So we might need to zoom out and back in again. But from that top left, we've got the external regulations. In that dark blue, we've got what in ServiceNow we call the authority document and the citations. So the authority document is like the textbook cover for something like ISO 27000. And within that, citations is the pieces of content within that book. So those two blue pieces kind of go together, and they're the external regulations. You might see that for something like ISO 27000, GDPR, SOX, you name it, right? HIPAA. All of those regulations live in this document area, and this is something that would be common for any organization, right? If you go to one organization, ISO is the same across all of them. As we move over to the right-hand side, those ones in green, we've got the things that are actually internal to us in our organization on our ServiceNow platform. So we've got the concept of a policy and a control objective. So very similarly, the policy is like the front page and the, you know, the main wraparound of that document, something like access control policy. And within that, we've got our control objectives. They're the things that we say we do, okay, within our policy. These are the things we need to do within our policy to abide by that policy. And what you see there is the connection between the control objective and the citation, because you've got something that's externally bound upon us, something we must do to comply with the regulation, and then the equivalent of that statement internally within our policy that says this is how we do it. Okay, so that's like our local implementation of the citation, if you like. And the beauty here is, I don't know how many people are watching that understand the concept of many to many, but a control objective can actually satisfy different citations within the same regulation or across multiple. So by you doing one thing within your policy, such as controlling your access, making sure you do access reviews, you actually satisfy multiple or can satisfy multiple areas of these external regulations, right? Now, as we move across to those amber, I would say amber colors here, we've now got the control itself. Now, the control itself is where the real power of GRC comes from, because what that does, it takes a copy, if you like, or an instance of that control objective, and it brings it to life, okay? And that is going to connect to our entity, which is the thing that makes it meaningful for us. Okay, so the entity in our occasion here, and maybe in the scenario we're going to work through, would be something like Amazon Web Services. Now that connects through the CMDB. And if you know in ServiceNow, you've got whole heaps and rafts of information related to the CMDB, things like incident, problem, change. These are operational processes. As we start to look at Clear Skye IGA and that connection through the CMDB to those environments, we can actually identify AWS and all the access reviews, all the access controls we've got in place around it. So we can measure our control for AWS for things like making sure we do access reviews, making sure we provision and revoke access. So we have distinct controls for those entities. And then the real power of the platform, which I am particularly fond of, the indicator templates. Okay, so this is where we get that automation, that continuous monitoring, so we don't have to keep going in and checking. If we just bring it back to our part one of the webinar, and you know, about being always prepared for the auditor and welcoming them in with open arms, embracing the auditor, our indicator templates are keeping a regular check on our operational data to help support and prove that these controls are implemented. And if they're not, if anything goes wrong, we've got a process in place that enables us to demonstrate how we respond to it. So I think this is really where it starts to come together. And you can see the connection at the top to the environment, and the connection at the bottom through the indicators over to that operational data. And I mean, how much are we going to get through today, TJ?
A surprising amount, considering we're about halfway through already, but wanted to set the stage, and we're going to take you through a basic example in this case, and hopefully we get to the proactive monitoring. So, you know, like we talked about in the previous webinar, this is a journey. It's a maturity, you know, and you're going to continue to grow, and you're going to see through these examples that although basic, you can see the building blocks, and we'll discuss a little bit about how we can improve, how we can refine, and how we can get better over time. And this is the exercise that we'll be having with auditors moving forward. We'll bring them to these, we'll highlight them, we'll go through an engagement and see sort of the evidence that's collected through these mechanisms that we just discussed. So without further ado, let's jump in.
I tell you what I particularly like is your tab color coding is aligned to the Miro board, right? It's attention to detail right there, TJ. So we're going to start at the top left, talking about external regs, I believe.
Absolutely. And like Phil had said, an external rec or an internal rec can be an authority document that dictates the requirements of that standard of that regulation within the system itself. So here we can see many of the details of a regulation within the system. And down below, you can see there's about 251 citations or requirements in this one authority document.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to just plus. I don't know if you just want to plus one it on the maybe command plus, like zoom in one level a bit more. I'm not sure how it's.
Let's go ahead and do it. Zoom. How's that?
Yes, yeah. I know we might lose a little bit of real estate, but I think it's important to get some of that context. That looks better. Thank you.
Perfect. So absolutely. So, how many of these are you seeing applied to most customers that you guys are working with on the compliance side, Phil?
Yeah, I mean, we're picking on ISO 27001, I think, here because it's the most common in terms of information security applies to all organizations, all industries, in various different forms. They will adapt this kind of regulation, and it's a really nice certificate to have that builds that trust. So this is a really good one. You've got others that we see that do relate to this, and we'll probably see some stuff that comes up in the demo data today. But yeah, ISO 27000. We talked about it last time. 12%, I think, of the controls, 14 out of 114 are about access controls. And I know we're going to zoom in on the 8.9s here. So around access control, we're seeing things about provisioning, things about access review. So it really tells a good story here.
Absolutely. And as we start to digest those requirements and align that to, the policies and the control objectives internally, we were actually surprised in the demo data that existed within ServiceNow. As we started to set up this webinar, we noticed right away that, there may be a control objective within our organization to review all privileged access on an annual basis. And we quickly realized that just with the demo data, that this control that we have in place to review access that we're doing on a regular basis may actually apply to multiple citations. So here we can see ISO 27001, but there's also other standards and other regulations that it may apply to. And depending on your industry and your organization, healthcare, finance, you may see others also that align with this. So as we go through this journey, you have to set this up once, but once set up, any new regulations you're adding, GDPR, CCPA, those new ones that, continually come out, the rules that you've defined, we then just associate the citation and we can go ahead and, leverage all of the work we've already done, the indicators, the setup, the, Clear Skye IGA, and how we're collecting that evidence in detail.
Yeah, exactly. And when you hear that mantra of test once, comply many, this is exactly where it comes from. So this is that many-to-many relationship that I mentioned on the diagram. Here we've got a control objective. It's our internal way of implementing the control and part of our policy, but it has connections out to the regulations. But it doesn't change what we do internally. So internally, we review all access privileges at least annually. And this then means that we can generate the control for AWS, we can build an indicator template, and we can monitor that using the data and the operational behaviors that we see implemented with Clear Skye's IGA product.
Absolutely. And although the internal control says annually, we're going to do a little bit better in this demo where we want to really be reviewing access on a 90-day basis. Because that data exists within ServiceNow, like you saw in the previous diagram, that we can go ahead and reach into the review objects, into the decisions that are being made, into the reviews that are being made, and we can collect that on a regular basis. Oftentimes people are doing audits every 90 days, quarterly is about right. But with this, we could do this weekly, we could do this daily, we could do this hourly, really, if we wanted to, because there's no additional effort from a human capital perspective.
Let's light it up, TJ. I want to see it. Bring it to life. So we've got the control objectives, we've got the indicator template, and this is really where we harness the power of the platform now, because this customer that we're on right now, they've got Clear Skye IGA, they're managing their access. Let's prove it. That auditor's about to come through the door. So how do we prove to them we've got things under control?
Absolutely. So here you can see the indicator template itself, some of the basic setup. We can define conditions. And because we're on the same platform, we live in the same ecosystem, you can actually point to tables that exist directly in the Clear Sky application. We're looking at the review objects, the individual decisions that are being made, and we're taking a screenshot to validate that they're being completed on a regular basis. Beyond the table, we can also specify more detailed conditions. So as we talk about maturing and getting better over time, as we initiate those initial audits, we're then going to be able to say, well, we missed this or we have gaps here. Hey, we should really focus on this. Something that I thought was extremely interesting when we were going through this and prepping was what Phil said. He said, I defined to say it was created in the last 3 months, the review has been completed, keep and remove access. But then you had asked, well, did they complete it on time, right?
Mm.
So not just looking at the bare minimum of that the review was completed, but also being able to dig in and look at the data and say, hey, how can we get more refined? How can we ensure that the controls and indicators that are in place are really reflecting the health of our compliance? Are we getting it done? How long does it take to remediate the activities once the review is complete? And having all of this feed into not only the entities like AWS, or SAP or other types of systems that you may be connected to, and then being able to highlight this at a high level within a dashboard itself. So these things are extremely powerful in the way that they could be defined. You specify an indicator review template, and then we define a reference field that allows us to map to all of the entities within scope for these controls. So you don't have to set one up for AWS and then set another one up for SAP. We define one template and they apply to all of the different systems that are within scope.
Yeah. And this condition builder that you've got here, this is where I see either an element of tuning. So we can set this up to begin with and just do those high level checks, show that something's happening, that we've got some data. But then you can start to, really focus in on specifics. So we can either change that one indicator template or we can set up different indicator templates and we can check that same control from different angles. Sometimes I say it's good to check it from both sides. So let's look for the negative, let's look for the positive. And actually on the method tab, you've got a very important drop-down choice here. And it talks about passed or failed. So what this means is if I've got results that meet my condition, according to my target type as well, that's another enhancement that's coming recently. So we can actually check for percentages or specific counts. This, if we just leave it at none, we say if I've got any results that meet this condition, that is a good thing. Therefore, my indicator passes, my control goes to compliant. I can switch it around. I can say this will fail if I've got anything that meets my condition. And again, you can check for target type and really enhance this and get very granular. So sometimes just checking for something positive, if it's not there yet, is not in itself a negative thing. Let's take the example, right? Imagine that you've got a new system set up and you're checking for access requests. Mm-hmm. Just because you haven't got any doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. Yeah. Nobody's asked for access yet. That's fine. So then you would also check for the negative and say, have I got any that, weren't behaving themselves according to the process that's been defined, and check for the condition against that. And by checking in both ways, we get, I think, a much more comprehensive view of our control status.
Absolutely. And, this is behind the weeds. These are the things that the administrators set up to make their lives easier. We want to look forward to the audit coming, right? We want all of this heavy work, the going out and collecting evidence, defining these controls, ensuring that we're good to go. We want to be able to perform and understand where we sit and what to expect before the auditor gets here. And so, but by defining these rule sets, by defining these indicator templates and controls and tying them to our authority documents, it then allows us to really, apply transparency to our compliance framework. And if I go over and click into the results, we then get nice lit up dashboards that will tell us across all of our authority documents, across all of our different entities, whether we're managing physical locations, whether we're managing certain data types or databases or applications or access across these different entities within the organization. we can see, where we're non-compliant, where we're compliant, and we could dig into that information to get additional information, or we can initiate audits and sort of, clean that data up from there. So here we're looking at everything across the entire compliance database. But if I wanted to focus in on the example we have for you today, which is Amazon Web Services, I can always come over to the entity and I can just start typing in Amazon. Oops, if I can spell Amazon, and go ahead and click on that Amazon Web Services, and it's going to light up all the dashboards specific to Amazon. And although we only set up a few indicator templates tied to several controls, you can see that it actually is referencing multiple authority documents. So when we talk about access being critical to compliance, as you can tell, every single or almost every single regulation has an element of access when it comes to technology, whether it's about offboarding or access reviews or the details of. Now, this gives us a perspective of where we sit, and will give us an idea of, where our areas of issue are. But what if we want to initiate an audit of this data now? And we can go ahead and start a new engagement within the audit component of GRC. Phil, did you want to say anything about the dashboards themselves or representation?
No, I mean it's really nice, and what we're seeing here is obviously like you say, that the ability to test once, comply many. Although we see some reds in multiple places, some greens in multiple places, they probably boil down. We know this from our demo setup, but just for the audience, these boil down to one or two controls that actually spread themselves across these regulations. So the three failures that we see on the screen, I believe they're all the three same control that are just permeating up, and they're affecting PCI. They're affecting the 20 critical controls, and I think the other one's the FedRAMP data in here, right?
Exactly.
But from an ISO perspective, we're actually pretty good right now.
That's a great point. And for those of you who aren't as familiar with ServiceNow, all of these dashboards that you see here are flexible. So if you wanted to change the perspective, if there were certain areas that were more relevant, you can drag and drop, you can move around, and you can update your dashboards to tell the story that's relevant to you. This is close to the out-of-box one. I made slight adjustments, but just know that if there's something you don't see here or that would be more relevant to your organization, you have the flexibility of the platform to take all of that data we're talking about and present it in a way that's meaningful to you to solve the problems within your organization.
And just mention performance analytics there as well, which is now for new customers on IRM standard upwards. In fact, you get PA enabled as part of your agreement, and then you can actually start to manage and visualize your compliance over time as well. So I mean, this might look good or it might look bad depending on your opinion, but is it better or worse than yesterday and last week and the month before? And can you actually see that continuous improvement taking shape? When you start to layer up something like performance analytics and that trending, you can really start to break it down and understand how you're doing.
That's a great point. We've seen a lot of value in performance analytics on the identity side also. So it's one thing to look at the data as a snapshot, which is what we're doing here. It's another thing to understand, well, you had a high amount of privileged access on Wednesday, and then on Thursday, it all went away. What happened there, right? So taking snapshots of indicators and elements that are relevant and seeing those trends and even predicting towards the future of what could potentially be coming and how to address that as it comes.
But the powerful thing here, PA aside, this is real time. This is right now. This is how you're looking right this moment in time. So you've got something you need to fix, right? And that's the other important thing here. You can remediate from this position, go straight in, drill in, get to that control, see why it failed, and go and do something about it.
Absolutely. And beyond the overview, the current state, we also have the ability to initiate audit engagements. Here's an example of one that we set up for today's demo. I'll probably zoom in a little bit. Just give me 1 second. Oh, we're at 125. Let's see if we can go to, there we go. All right. So, within the engagement itself, in this case, we had mentioned last webinar that there's different types of audits. So you may have an external auditor come in, you may have an internal audit, which is usually happening prior to that external audit, getting prepared and ensuring that, things could either be resolved or that you understand the current state of things and you're prepared for the auditor when they come so that you can focus on the getting better, not sort of discovering and finding out the things you didn't know that should have been picked up within the system itself. From an engagement perspective, we can define our scheduling and all of the project management capabilities you would expect around an audit. And then we could define the entities that are going to be within scope. So, like we mentioned, you could look at data centers or you could look at applications. In this case, we're going to be focusing on Amazon Web Services and the access and resources related to it. So, we select our entity, and what that's going to do is take all of that data from the control perspective, all of the indicator results, everything that we've defined and been talking about leading up to this. So I didn't have to reach out to a bunch of different people. I didn't have to reach out to my external IGA solution or my spreadsheets or any of that detail. That's all happening on a regular basis already. Those operations are in play. And because we've defined the controls and the indicators and we live on the same platform, all I needed to do was select the entity, the controls were added, the indicator results were added.
So we specified the AWS entity there, TJ, and we've got 3 controls for that, right? So we've really just focused this in for the purposes of the demo, but we've got those 3 controls there that have been instantiated against our control objectives. They're joined back up to the external regulations. But these controls, I think, should be, even just reading the title of them, really start to make sense when we talk about Clear Skye IGA, right? Establishing access rights, implement a centralized identification access management program or platform, and review all access privileges at least annually. So these are all things that are important for organizations to be doing, regardless of how you actually do this, right? How do you grant access? How do you review access? You do need to do it. Now, when you start to do it on the platform with Clear Skye's IGA, connect that into GRC, it brings it all together. So the auditor turns up and says, show me how you manage access. No problem.
Absolutely. And we could just go right over to our indicator results and see those exact examples. So, that we're connected in managing, AWS, linking them to the environment record within Clear Skye, seeing the approvals, seeing the accounts, seeing the access and all of the requests within a single location to validate that we're connected and have that under management. I set up another one here, which is really just a sort of silly indicator that I defined that says TJ shouldn't have any admin access. That's going to come into play when we look at the proactive monitoring in just a second, because it's going to prevent or at least highlight components of that. And then the last one, which I'm going to dig into a little bit here, is that we're reviewing access on a 90-day basis. So every 90 days, we're ensuring that access for AWS is being reviewed. And from an indicator result, it actually takes a snapshot of that data. So if I were to go ahead and click in, and we can see the supporting data that makes up the AWS review, the decisions that have been made, and we can confirm and spot check that information. If we wanted to look at additional details, because we exist on the same platform, we can actually go over to the live record. So exactly that decision was made, go ahead and click on that view button, and then click into the review itself of the mechanism that was distributed to a manager or an application owner to complete that review. So if I go ahead and say open record, we can now see the individual review itself that the end user performed to go ahead and make that decision that access should be kept or removed, and any actions or follow-up remediation tasks that need to be completed as part of it. So if I click in, I can see those different details and the review that made up those details. So maybe I'm talking to my auditor and they, have feedback about what we're showing or how we're showing it or the scope of that. That's going to allow us to refine those, because we're doing these processes today, whether you're doing them manually through spreadsheet exports and email, or whether you have something in ServiceNow today or another IGA solution. And in this case, we're doing it within the ServiceNow platform, which then allows us to benefit by pulling this information and having everything attached under a unified compliance framework. I didn't have to go somewhere. I didn't have to get an export. I didn't have to do an integration. Just by performing the operations and activities within the ServiceNow platform, right next to GRC, we get to benefit and we can dig in and see those details in a seamless experience.
And you picked 90 days actually there, TJ. You're saying check every 90 days. The control says check at least annually. You've picked 90 days, but in our previous part 1, when we were talking about this, you were saying that a lot of the customers you talk to, it takes them 90 days to actually do the review, right? You're checking every 90 days for anything within a certain period and saying, actually you're checking monthly, I think, in the indicator for things over the last 90 days. So it's a rolling 90 days that we're only ever going to be 3 months maximum out of date of where we currently are. and have then a month to actually remediate those things. So by the time the auditor comes up, they're probably going to come around every 6 to 12 months, something like this. They're going to come up and say, well, you've got stuff in order. Now you need to improve that a bit further. How are you going to do, how do you make sure the things that you do approve when you give access, how do you make sure that's not going to cause you problems further down the line? Is there an angle here for something like proactive compliance?
There absolutely is. Let's take a look at this little teal grouping that we have over on the right side. So now that we've defined our compliance framework, we've tied those controls into our IGA platform. Instead of waiting for something to happen and then cleaning up afterwards, generating an issue and having to go through the process of issue remediation and potentially a finding in one of your internal audits or your external audits, how can we prevent high risk things from happening to begin with? And the interesting thing is because we exist on the same platform, it allows us to access the compliance database, the indicators themselves, and we can actually use those as proactive rules to go ahead and either let the approver know that a request may have issues, that we're going to no longer be compliant, and give them the information that would, allow them to make the right decision on behalf of the organization. So here we are at the ServiceNow portal. We're using a standard record producer in this example. We also have an access catalog that would allow you to request applications, but I'm trying to request access to a specific entitlement within AWS. So if I go ahead and scroll down a little bit, for those of you who have ServiceNow, this is extremely familiar for you. We're going to go ahead and add membership in the AWS environment, and I'm going to go ahead and try and grant myself the AWS Cloud9 administrator entitlement for TJ at clearsky.com. Now, if you remember earlier, we do have it set up so that TJ can't have admin access. So just by having admin in the name of that entitlement, it's going to tell me no. Now, this would have normally been picked up in an audit, an internal engagement, like we mentioned, or it could have been picked up in more of an external engagement, or just seen on the dashboard. Chances are those findings that we had on our dashboard earlier were probably related to this control here. So we saw about 3 of them. And so then we submit, and we should start to see analysis start to be completed. So here you can see that it was able to do the identity compliance analysis. And it did do my peer group analysis, but it looks like I'm having some challenges on the compliance analysis. So I was hoping to have this set up by the webinar. It doesn't look like it worked as expected. So
that should have been non-compliant. That should have actually told you, sorry, you can't do that.
That's absolutely true. So for example, if I come back into my dashboard itself, and I open up one of my non-compliant ones. So if I just click into that red one.
And just while you're doing that, TJ, I know we're nearly at the top of the time on this. So just a little prompt to anyone, if you're watching live and you got any questions, get them into the little Q&A section underneath or to the side, and we'll pick up questions in a few moments. So you're going into a non-compliant control here.
That's exactly right. So I went from the dashboard, just waiting for these to load. It's always a challenge doing a live demo, clicking through stuff. So just give me a second while we wait for this to come up. So let me go ahead and click in. And that should bring up my control for non-compliance. So I can see my control objective. I can see my name, policies, all of those details are available here. And then in this case, I actually want to go ahead and I'm going to click into my control objective. And I really want to bring up the control and get a reason, why that may not have worked. I believe what I had done to make it show compliant was I changed the indicator result late last night. So if I go to my indicator template and I open this one up here, I'm guessing that I didn't save it or revert it back after. So it didn't detect any valid, findings as part of the test that I had just done. So I'm just
okay, so you're taking the indicator template against the control, the condition that we set up, and you're actually evaluating that condition ahead of time and saying, I've got a request here. If I do this, what would it mean? Would that meet the condition? Therefore, it's good. If it doesn't, then it's bad.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So in this case, we have an indicator that says any entitlement within the environment that has admin and someone of an account that TJ owns is trying to request that, that's going to be a finding within our database. Now, this could be anything. It could be, for example, if a vendor is gaining access to resources they shouldn't have. You could use any type of condition to sort of exclude certain populations within the organization, external folks versus internal folks. from being able to gain access to those different resources, or at least highlight the risk that is potentially presented when you grant them access to those resources.
Yeah, I mean, that's a leap beyond, I think, what we were expecting to be able to cover today. So it's great that you had at least the concept there. I know it didn't quite come through in this scenario, but that's a live demo. That's what life is like in our world, I think. So
It really is.
it will work next time.
Of course.
Anything else we need to show on here? I'm just conscious of time, and we've got a couple of questions I can see that we need to get to. So
No,
should we?
absolutely. Let's switch over to Q&A. Hopefully get some of those questions answered for you guys. Thanks for watching.
Okay, so the first question that we've got here, actually, it's about your Clear Skye IGA products. This one's for you, TJ. Is Clear Skye on the ServiceNow Store? Is it a ServiceNow Store app?
It absolutely is. Yeah. So we're available on the ServiceNow Store. You can download it directly into your instance today. It's supported all the way up to the Rome release and really all the backwards releases that ServiceNow supports. So if you're a ServiceNow customer today, feel free to reach out and we can get it installed for you.
Excellent. Being on the ServiceNow Store, that's quite a powerful thing, right? That means it's certified, it's trusted. It's not just somebody throwing a solution together. It's actually gone through a process, right? You can't just put stuff on the store, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, it's a pretty heavy process here. We like to say that we're split between 50% of Clear Skye's experts on the ServiceNow space, but the other 50% are identity experts. So before we even make it to the ServiceNow Store, we're validating functionality. We're going through multiple rounds of testing against the releases that we certify for. And that's just the beginning. So once we certify it, we then go through a set of automated tests within the ServiceNow certification process. We have to go through, performance, best practices, security that are being validated against the application, and ensuring that we're following best practices. And then there's a live demo with the certifier within the ServiceNow instance, or within their instance from a certifying perspective, where they validate the software once again. And then, of course, it gets installed into your dev environment, and your internal teams also validate. So there's all these, checkpoints from the time that we're writing the code and developing it to the point that it makes it to your production system.
Okay, excellent. And Wrangu have got a store on the app as an app on the store as well. So I've seen some of that process, TJ, but to hear it from your side as well is really, really great. So the other question we've got, I think it's related, and maybe we can take this from two angles, actually. So for the Clear Skye IGA product, if we're implementing that, how long does an implementation normally take? And because I'm not sure if this question is about that entirely, maybe I can try and answer that from a GRC implementation perspective as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So it really depends. It is a large application and has multiple modules related to it. So we can get connected into, your main directory service, your HR system fairly quick, and we can aggregate the data and start providing value right away. The audits that you saw today could be performed as soon as the data is available within the system. If you start to look at things like identity lifecycle, we're often pulling in different organization units. We're often pulling in, and really there's a huge process component to it. So it's about understanding what onboarding means to your organization. And that may stretch out the timeline quite a bit. So you could be seeing value within 60 to 90 days, but projects often continue on. You continue to evolve, you continue to mature and increase your value within the platform itself.
Excellent. So yeah, I think some of those numbers are quite similar from a GRC perspective. It really depends where the customer is going to be starting from. Assuming it's kind of greenfield, they've got nothing installed to start with. They're probably going to start with policy and compliance or start with risk management. Typically, you'll start with one or the other, and then you'll do the next one after that. So we tend to do like a phased approach, and it would be something around, from around 8 weeks and upwards. Typically, we'll go in and start with out-of-the-box implementation, really get the customer going, get them set up, start using the product, start getting value from their investment, and then look at what they really need next. If they start with policy and compliance, we'll probably come back, do like a phased implementation and do risk management next. If we start with risk, we'll come back and do policy and compliance next. And then we start to join them all together. And then we start to look at, okay, where do we need to focus some more attention and make this adoption really start to drive extra value within their implementation, within their entire ServiceNow platform. And I guess when they start to put Clear Skye IGA on, and we start to put GRC together, that's another success story waiting to happen.
Absolutely. Now, I know we're at the top of the hour, but I do want to show this proactive monitoring. So for those of you who are ready, I'm going to reshare my screen just to be able to show you that last submission. We have everything queued up, and we should be able to see it in just a second. So it's too good not to show.
I want to see it. I want to see it, TJ. This is excellent. So yeah, thanks to everyone who's been tuned in so far as well. Thanks for the good questions.
Perfect. So the issue I had was I actually broke it by changing the condition itself. So it was no longer valid. I had added a bunch of sort of random text at the end of this because I was trying to validate the opposite, right? And so in this case, I'm just going to fix this indicator template real quick. Going to go ahead and save that, which is going to then apply it down to my entities and update the control database. And then once this is saved with my new condition associated with it, which is now looking at anything that contains the word admin for TJ Gryziec, I can now go over to my request again, and we have that same request set up. And at this point, I can go ahead and submit, and this should go ahead and prompt that I have an indicator. And it'll give me the name of the indicator, but it is worth mentioning that this is all being driven in ServiceNow workflow. So if I wanted to change the details, so here we can see that it says compliance analysis non-compliant, and it's because prevent TJ from having access to admin resources. But this could be a series of things, and how much detail you show within here is really driven by your organization. You could decide whether you want to just show the name of the indicator, or if you want to sort of highlight a high-level risk score or other information that may be present within your compliance database. This informs the approver the potential risk, and they can make the right decision for the organization. So really appreciate your time today. Hope you guys are as excited about this as me and Phil are, and let us know if you want to see more. Talk to you soon.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. And we should end the screen share and just say goodbye, stay safe, and see you on the next one. Thank you.